Some wars are fought not with swords or stocks, but with salt and fire. For Marco Leone, his battlefield was the chaotic, vibrant, unforgiving streets of Naples. In a world obsessed with Michelin stars and the sterile chemistry of molecular gastronomy, Marco was an alchemist of a different sort. He didn't seek to deconstruct food, he sought to deconstruct the soul. He believed that the most profound flavors were not found in the palaces of haute cuisine, but were hidden in the simple, peasant dishes of his youth, the food of struggle, of memory, and of love. His gift was a form of culinary synesthesia. He could taste not just ingredients, but the emotions they carried. He could taste the nostalgia in a grandmother's tomato sauce, the faint echo of a fisherman's hopes in a perfectly grilled sardine, the ghost of a celebration in a 20-year-old balsamic. For Marco, every dish was a story. He didn't follow recipes. He followed the emotional breadcrumbs left by generations. This was his alchemy, to take the mundane and, through an act of profound empathy, elevate it into the sublime, creating food that didn't just feed the body, but healed the heart.
The god of the culinary world was a man named Anton Valerius. He was the world's most feared and influential food critic, a man whose newspaper column, The Scalpel, could create or destroy a chef's career with a single, perfectly crafted sentence. Valerius was a priest of technique, of intellectual perfection. He believed food was an art of precision, not passion. He despised what he called sentimental cooking, seeing it as a cheap trick to manipulate the undiscerning palate. To him, Marco's philosophy was not just wrong, it was a vulgar insult to the very craft he revered.
The collision was inevitable. On a trip to Naples, Valerius, looking for a target to sharpen his wit, decided to visit the peasant alchemist he had heard whispers about. He arrived at Marco's stall like a king visiting the hovels of his poorest subjects. Marco, recognizing him instantly, felt not fear, but a surge of defiant hope. This was his chance to prove that soul could triumph over technique. He cooked his signature dish, a simple ragout that had taken him years to perfect, a recipe that was a distillation of his entire childhood. He served it to the critic, his heart pounding in his chest. Valerius put down his fork. He didn't say a word to Marco. He simply paid, stood up, and walked away, his face a mask of cold indifference. A week later, the review was published. It was not a critique, it was an execution. Valerius didn't attack the flavor, he attacked the philosophy behind it. He called Marco's cooking the tyranny of nostalgia, a culinary blackmail that used cheap sentiment to mask a lack of skill. He wrote with devastating cruelty, "Mr. Leone does not cook for his customers, he cooks for the ghost of his grandmother. I suggest he keep his family therapy sessions out of the public square." The review was brilliant, witty, and it destroyed Marco's burgeoning reputation overnight. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The curious tourists who had started to seek him out vanished. Even some of the locals, influenced by the power of the printed word, began to look at him with suspicion, as if he were a charlatan. His little stall, once a beacon of warmth and community, became an island of loneliness. The laughter and chatter were replaced by a heavy silence. To survive, Marco had to take a loan, mortgaging the small apartment that had been in his family for generations. He was no longer cooking from the heart. He was cooking to pay the interest. And the joy, the very soul of his craft, began to wither and die. He fell into a deep creative despair. He began to doubt everything, his philosophy, his gift, his very identity. He tried to change. He bought books on modern technique. He tried to plate his dishes with the sterile precision of the chefs Valerius praised. He created food that was technically proficient but emotionally mute. It was hollow, it was a lie, and his few remaining customers could taste it. An old woman, a patron for years, tasted one of his new modern dishes and gently pushed the plate away. "Marco," she said, her voice full of a sad kindness, "where did you go?" It was the question he had been asking himself for months. One rainy afternoon, while clearing out his late grandmother's belongings to pay a debt, he found it. A small tin box, rusted at the edges. Inside was not jewelry or money, but a collection of old, faded black and white photographs. And tucked among them, a single, folded, handwritten recipe. It was for a simple almond cake, a cake she only ever made on one specific day of the year. As he looked at the familiar, spidery handwriting, he was hit by a tidal wave of memory, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. It was in this moment, at his absolute lowest, holding this fragile piece of paper, that he realized Valerius was wrong. This wasn't therapy, this was an inheritance, and a new, impossible, insane idea began to form in his mind. The idea that formed in Marco's mind was not about revenge. It was about translation. He realized he had been trying to speak his language of emotion to a man who only understood the language of intellect. To defeat Valerius, he had to become fluent in his enemy's native tongue. His new obsession became the critic himself. He would not just cook for him, he would deconstruct him, analyze him, understand him on a molecular level, just as Valerius did with food. His kitchen, once a place of creation, became an intelligence agency. The walls, once bare, were now covered with every article Valerius had ever written. His photograph, maps of his childhood town, anything Marco could find. He spent months reading between the lines of Valerius's critiques. He saw a pattern. Valerius didn't just praise technique. He praised control, order, and intellectual purity. He despised anything that felt chaotic, accidental, or overly emotional. Marco realized that Valerius's entire philosophy was a fortress, built to protect him from something. But what? The clue came from a single throwaway line in an early interview, where Valerius mentioned a childhood spent in the harsh, desolate countryside of post-war rural France. Marco sold the last of his valuable kitchen equipment to fund a trip. He traveled to the small, forgotten village where the world's greatest food critic had grown up, a place of stone, wind, and hunger. He spent days in the village's small, dusty municipal archive, poring over birth records and old photographs. And then he found the story. The Valerius family, once prosperous, had lost everything during the war. Anton's father had died, and his mother had struggled to raise him alone in extreme poverty. Then the final tragedy, a house fire, from which his mother had saved him, but had perished herself shortly after from her injuries. He was orphaned at the age of 7. In that dusty file, Marco found a faded photograph of a woman with sad, kind eyes and a small newspaper clipping about the fire. He finally understood. Valerius's obsession with control and intellect wasn't arrogance. It was a shield built by a traumatized little boy against a world of chaos, loss, and overwhelming emotion. And then he found the final piece of the puzzle. He spoke to the oldest woman in the village, a woman who remembered Anton's mother. He asked her what she cooked. The old woman's eyes lit up with a distant memory. She spoke of a simple peasant dish, a rustic stew of lentils and smoked sausage, a dish of poverty. But then she mentioned one unique detail. Anton's mother, as a memory of her former prosperous life, would always add a single, secret, almost unobtainable ingredient to the stew, a few drops of precious, aged truffle oil, an echo of a life that was gone forever. It was the taste of love in a time of ashes. Marco now had his weapon, not a dish for the critic, but a dish for the orphan.
Marco returned to Naples a changed man. The obsessive energy of the detective was replaced by the quiet, focused calm of a master artisan on the eve of his greatest work. He sold the last thing of value he owned, his father's vintage Vespa, to buy the finest ingredients. Not expensive, but authentic. He found a farmer who grew the same variety of lentils that were common in post-war France. He sourced a smoked sausage from a family in the Alps who still used the centuries-old recipe. And for the final, crucial element, he spent a small fortune on a tiny vial of vintage single-estate truffle oil, so potent that its aroma filled his small kitchen with the ghosts of an ancient forest.
For 3 days, he cooked. It was not a process of following a recipe, but of chasing a ghost. He used not just his palate, but his entire being, trying to feel what a mother in the depths of despair and love would feel. He imagined the cold of the stone house, the smell of the wood smoke, the fear and the fierce, protective love for her son. He made a dozen versions of the stew, tasting, adjusting, often throwing them away in frustration. He was not trying to replicate a dish. He was trying to resurrect a memory that wasn't his. Finally, on the 3rd day, he took a spoonful and he knew. The balance was there. The humble warmth of the lentils, the smoky resilience of the sausage, and then the faintest, most heartbreaking whisper of truffle. The ghost of a forgotten luxury.
Now came the final, most impossible step, the delivery. He could not simply send it to Valerius's newspaper. The Critic received hundreds of dishes a week, all of which were discarded by his assistants. It had to be personal. It had to bypass the fortress. Marco put the stew in a simple, insulated thermal container. He bought a plane ticket to Paris with the last of his money. He had no plan, no appointment, no invitation. He only had a dish, an address, and the insane conviction that a single taste could unravel a man's entire life. It was the ultimate culinary gamble.
He stood for hours in the cold Parisian rain across the street from the building where Anton Valerius lived, an elegant, imposing Haussmannian apartment block. He watched the lights in the windows, waiting for a sign, an opportunity. He saw Valerius return home in the evening, a brief, solitary figure disappearing through the grand entrance. Marco knew he had one shot. He approached the concierge, a formidable-looking woman behind the marble desk. He didn't try to lie or invent a story. He spoke the simple, unadorned truth. "My name is Marco Leone," he said in broken French, holding out the container. "I am a cook from Naples. This is not for the critic. This is for the man. Please, just make sure he receives it." The concierge, for a reason she herself would never fully understand, perhaps it was the desperate sincerity in his eyes, or perhaps just a moment of boredom, did not throw the container away. Later that evening, she placed it outside the door of Valerius's penthouse apartment with the evening mail. Valerius returned home late from a dinner, his mind already composing a scathing review of another overpriced, soulless meal. He saw the simple, anonymous container. Annoyed at the breach of his privacy, he almost kicked it aside, but a faint, barely perceptible aroma escaped from it. A smell so faint, so deeply buried in his subconscious that it bypassed his intellect entirely and struck a strange, resonant chord deep within his memory.
He took the container inside. In his sterile, minimalist kitchen, a place of steel and marble, he opened it. The warmth released the full aroma. It was not a complex bouquet. It was simple, humble. Lentils, smoke, earth, and something else. Something that made his heart stop for a single terrifying beat. He spooned a small amount into a bowl, his movements stiff and automatic. He, the world's greatest critic, was not analyzing. He was acting on a primal, forgotten instinct. He raised the spoon to his lips. He tasted. And in that single moment, the fortress he had spent 40 years building was leveled to the ground. He was not in his Parisian penthouse. He was 7 years old, in a cold stone kitchen, the air thick with wood smoke. He could feel the rough wool of his sweater, see the flames of the fire in the hearth. And he could see his mother, her face tired but full of love, handing him a bowl of this very stew, the faint, luxurious scent of truffle, a secret promise that things would one day be better. The taste was not a flavor, it was a time machine, and the grief he had buried for a lifetime came roaring to the surface. Anton Valerius, the Iron Man of cuisine, leaned against his marble countertop and wept for the first time since he was a child.
The next morning, the world was waiting for Valerius's weekly column. They expected another brilliant, merciless execution of some hapless chef. What they got was something else entirely. The column was not titled The Scalpel, it was titled On the Tyranny of Memory. It was not a review, it was a confession. He did not name the restaurant or the chef. He simply described, in stark, painfully honest detail, receiving an anonymous dish. He wrote about his childhood, the fire, his mother, and he wrote that this single simple dish had taught him more about the true nature of food than his entire career of deconstructing Michelin-starred meals. He ended the column with a single, stunning sentence. To the alchemist in Naples, I offer not a star, but an apology. You were right all along.
Valerius's column was a cataclysm. The culinary world was turned upside down. Who is the alchemist of Naples became the obsessive question on every food lover's lips. Journalists and culinary pilgrims descended on Naples, searching for the anonymous chef who had broken the unbreakable critic. They found Marco at his humble street stall, still serving his simple, soulful food to the people of his neighborhood. They offered him fortunes for his own restaurant, for TV shows, for book deals. He politely, quietly refused them all. He had not embarked on his mission for fame or wealth. He had done it to prove a point, and the point had been made.
A few weeks later, a visitor arrived at his stall. It was Anton Valerius. He was not dressed as a critic, but as a simple man in a plain coat. There were no cameras, no notebooks. The two men stood for a long moment in silence. I never knew the name of the woman who cooked for me that day in the village, Marco said quietly. What was her name? Valerius looked away for a moment, his composure momentarily faltering. Helene, he whispered. Her name was Helene. Marco simply nodded. He turned back to his stove, prepared a bowl of the lentil stew, and handed it to Valerius. This, Marco said, is for you. From Helene.
Anton Valerius retired a week later. He never wrote another review. He spent the rest of his years creating a foundation to support and preserve the world's endangered recipes. The humble, regional dishes in danger of being forgotten in the age of globalized cuisine. Marco Leone continued to cook from his stall in the heart of Naples, becoming a quiet legend, a destination for those who sought not just a meal, but an experience. His great discovery was that the most powerful flavors are not born of technique or intellect, but of empathy. To truly cook for someone, you must first understand their hunger, not just for food, but for the memories and feelings that only food can restore.
The powerful, energetic masculine baritone. The pace is rapid, punchy, and relentless. Every word hits like a drum beat. Sentences are short, sharp, and explosive, delivered with urgency and rhythm. The intonation is fiery and passionate, like a warrior shouting his saga to the world. His voice crackles with intensity,
dragging the listener straight into the action, breathless and fully immersed.